Think about a time, maybe recently or maybe even years ago, when you just completely normalized a physical discomfort.
Like just totally embedded it into your daily routine.
Exactly. I mean, deeply embedded it into your everyday existence. Picture, picture sleeping on a terrible sagging mattress.
Oh, man. I know exactly the kind you mean.
Right. The kind with that massive trench
Guilty
right in
there.
the middle. The springs are literally pushing through the fabric. And, for that first week, you wake up agonizingly stiff.
You just absolutely hate it.
You hate it, but you don't replace it. Months go by, and you subconsciously learn to accommodate it. You stop reaching for the top shelf in your kitchen because your shoulder aches from how you slept.
Yeah, you start sleeping entirely on your left side just to avoid that one rogue spring.
Exactly. You develop this elaborate physical routine just to get out of bed in the morning, and then you just go about your life. You don't even think about the mattress anymore.
It just becomes your normal.
Right. But then one day a friend comes over to help you move, or maybe a partner stays over, and they sit on that awful mattress and they look at you with absolute horror.
Just completely bewildered.
Yeah, bewildered. And they say, how on earth are you living like this? This is fundamentally broken.
And that's the moment, right? That's when the illusion just shatters.
Yes, in that exact moment, you experience this jarring realization.
Yeah.
You look at your own life through their eyes and you think, wait, is this not normal?
Like, have I been suffering this whole time and my brain
Just deleted the suffering.
Yeah.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
want you to hold on to that feeling. Hold on to that tiny everyday phenomena of the sagging mattress and imagine scaling that up.
scaling it way, way up?
Imagine scaling that normalization of pain, not just to a piece of furniture, but to your entire human existence.
It forces a really profound cognitive shift, honestly, because the scenario you're describing, it goes far beyond just getting used to a bad piece of furniture.
Hmm.
It touches on the human brain's incredible and honestly almost terrifying capacity to adapt to its baseline reality, regardless of how hostile or punishing that reality might be.
It's just survival, right?
Exactly. The nervous system is designed for survival. And survival often means habituating to chronic stress so you can focus on immediate threats. When your baseline shifts that drastically, your entire definition of what constitutes a good day or a bad day.
Or even just a normal day.
Right. It alters fundamentally. You lose the objective measurement of your own well-being.
And that concept, the shifting of the human baseline, that is the beating heart of our mission on today's deep dive.
It's a fascinating topic.
It really is. We are unpacking a truly profound, deeply personal written reflection. It's titled When They Finally Heard. It's a relatively short piece of text, but it is incredibly dense.
Very dense. There's a lot to unpack there.
So our goal today is to pull this apart, basically sentence by sentence, and uncover the hidden realities of living with a chronic illness. Specifically, the author is detailing their experience navigating the world with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And what we find in these paragraphs, it isn't, a sterile medical account. It's an intense philosophical exploration of pain, of public perception, and really just the bizarre mechanics of human survival.
Yeah, the source material offers this rare, completely unfiltered look into the machinery of chronic care.
It's so raw.
It is. Just to give some context, the text centers around a firsthand account of a patient making what should be a completely mundane administrative phone call.
Like paying a bill or something.
Pretty much. The author is contacting a medical agency, Ontario Health at Home, for a standard intake or a file update. In the grand scheme of the medical system, these calls are usually totally frictionless, bureaucratic checkpoints.
Right. Check the boxes, move on.
Exactly. But what unfolds during this routine administrative process is a startling and incredibly rare moment of true validation for the author.
The bureaucratic wall momentarily dissolves.
Yes. A genuine human connection regarding the harsh reality of their physical state is actually made.
And as we get deeper into this text, we uncover a core paradox that completely rewrites how we think about the human body. The author describes a condition that makes them physically delicate to an extreme degree.
Very extreme.
And we're going to explore how, in this specific context, extreme physical delicacy does not equate to weakness.
That's the real twist here.
It forces the person into becoming something akin to a highly disciplined secret athlete. It flips our entire cultural understanding of strength and fragility totally upside down.
It completely dismantles it.
So let's jump in. The deep dive kicks off with this phone call to Ontario Health at Home. The author mentions they had been meaning to call for a long time. They finally pick up the phone, the agency opens their file, and they note that the agency has their old information.
Right.
So it starts off incredibly casually, just a routine check-in.
And in the context of healthcare bureaucracy, a routine check-in is usually driven by a very sterile algorithmic checklist.
You just want to get through the queue.
Exactly. The agency workers need to update the file, so they ask standard triage questions. They ask if the patient is using any mobility aids. The author informs them about their wheelchair use. Then the workers move down the checklist and ask about recent falls. And this is the precise moment where the divergence between the patient's internal reality and the objective medical reality really begins to fracture the conversation.
Yeah, because the author casually mentions, and this phrasing is just so important to me, they say, a couple little falls that we had recently getting off the nest.
Little falls.
Little falls. And they immediately qualify the statement by adding, but they weren't too bad.
Of course.
Then the health worker asks about pain. And the author, maintaining that exact same casual conversational tone, says, yep, all of our joints and our ribs, and just matter-of-factly lists off widespread severe bodily pain.
The absolute disconnect between the speaker and the listener in this exchange is just palpable. You have an author reporting falls and widespread joint and rib pain with the emotional weight of someone discussing their grocery list.
We need eggs, milk, and my ribs are slipping out.
Literally. And on the other end of the line, you have health workers whose professional baseline is rooted in objective medical severity.
Right.
The text specifically highlights the reaction of the agency workers. To the author's casual cataloging of pain and falls, the worker's response is a shocked, "Oh my goodness."
And the text emphasizes this by repeating the reaction twice. Oh my goodness.
Genuine shock.
And the author's internal reaction to the health worker's shock is the first major revelation of the text. The author writes, and to us, this is so normal. We talk about it and deal with it all the time.
They're just completely used to it.
Right. So when the health workers react with verbal shock, the author is sitting there on the phone thinking, what are you talking about? This is just a little minor stuff. We're doing really good right now.
Doing really good.
I want to pause on that phrase. We're doing really good right now. They are casually mentioning falling down, having rib pain, having joint pain, needing a wheelchair. And their genuine assessment of their current state is doing really good.
It's hard to even fathom.
It is. I was racking my brain trying to visualize how a person reaches that point, and I came up with an analogy. I call it the tilted floor.
Oh, I like this. Let's explore the mechanics of the tilted floor.
Okay, so imagine you buy a historic house. It's got beautiful bones, but the foundation has settled terribly over the last century.
Okay.
The entire main floor of the house has a severe, 15-degree slant. When you first move in, your life is an absolute nightmare. You're constantly tripping, your coffee spills every time you set a mug on the counter.
The eggs just slide right off the pan on the stove.
Yes, you are constantly fighting gravity just to walk from the bedroom to the kitchen. It is physically and mentally exhausting to simply exist inside this house.
It sounds awful.
But you lived there for 5 years. Over those 5 years, your brain, your vestibular system, your muscles, they all map that 15-degree slant perfectly.
You adapt.
You completely adapt. You develop micromuscles in your ankles just to hold your balance. You learn precisely how to set a mug down so it catches the edge of the coaster and doesn't slide.
You're navigating the living room flawlessly in the dark.
Exactly. To you, you aren't walking on a slant anymore. You're just walking. The slant has become your absolute normal.
The human organism has completely habituated to a hostile environment just to conserve energy.
Exactly. Now, imagine a guest comes over to your house for the very first time. They step through the front door, take one single step onto that 15-degree slant, immediately lose their balance, stumble hard into the hallway wall, and look at you in sheer panic.
They're terrified.
Yeah, they say, oh my goodness, how do you live like this? This is incredibly dangerous and exhausting.
Right.
And you look at them completely baffled by their dramatic reaction and say, what are you talking about? The floor is totally fine. I'm actually doing really good at walking right now. I barely spilled my coffee today.
That's brilliant. The guest is seeing the objective gravitational reality of the hazard. But you are experiencing your deeply adapted, profoundly shifted baseline.
Exactly.
And the tilted floor beautifully illustrates the psychological and physiological phenomenon of shifting baselines, particularly in the realm of chronic conditions.
It really puts it in perspective.
It does. If we look deeply at the neurobiology of what happens when an individual lives with chronic, unremitting physical challenges, like the widespread joint pain and structural instability the author describes, we find that the brain simply cannot sustain a state of perpetual alarm.
It would just burn you out, right?
Exactly. It is way too metabolically and psychologically expensive. To be in a constant state of panic burns immense amounts of energy. The cortisol levels would just destroy the body. So the nervous system and the psyche collude to lower the alarm volume. The subjective experience of normal is entirely recalibrated.
The bar for what constitutes an actual crisis just gets pushed higher and higher. If a level 5 pain is your daily starting point, a level 5 pain is no longer a crisis.
It's just morning.
It's just morning. Exactly.
A physical event that would send a healthy person to the emergency room in an ambulance becomes a little fall that wasn't too bad. We also need to look closely at the specific language the author uses. They mention falling, getting off the nest. That phrasing is incredibly revealing.
I thought so too. Why a nest?
Well, a nest implies a carefully constructed, highly controlled zone of safety. It suggests a bed or a resting place loaded with supportive pillows, specific blankets, perhaps mobility aids positioned perfectly within arm's reach.
Like a little fortress?
Yes, it is a curated microenvironment designed to prevent the body from falling apart. And just the simple act of transitioning out of that highly controlled safety zone resulted in a fall. Yet, to the author, this is just a minor Tuesday inconvenience. The true emotional weight of the text hits a few lines later when the author reflects on the health worker's shocked empathy. The author writes about realizing that there's a level of care that we just don't ever imagine where it's not being in pain.
That realization is devastating. Realizing there's a level of human existence where you are just not in pain.
It's heartbreaking.
And the author doesn't say they hope for it or they are wishing for it.
Yeah.
They explicitly state they don't even imagine it anymore. The very concept of waking up without pain has been entirely erased from their menu of possible realities.
It's gone completely.
It is a totally foreign concept, like trying to imagine a new primary color.
It represents the ultimate invisible loss in chronic illness. Experiencing acute pain and desperately wishing for it to stop is a universal human experience. We've all been there.
Yeah.
But it is an entirely different, vastly deeper level of chronic reality to have the very concept of a pain-free existence vanish from your cognitive framework because your baseline has shifted so profoundly over the years.
That's a really heavy thought.
When the administrative health workers on the phone say, "Oh my goodness, they are doing something vital," they are momentarily shining a harsh light on that forgotten, pain-free baseline.
Right?
They are holding up a mirror and reminding the author of the sheer steepness of the tilted floor they are forced to walk on every single day.
And the author's reaction to this empathy is fascinating. They describe the reaction of the health workers as weirdly validating and unusual.
Unusual is the key word there.
Think about that. If you call a health agency and list off widespread joint pain, rib pain, and recent falls, basic human empathy seems like it should be the absolute standard expected response.
You'd certainly hope so.
The fact that the author finds this empathy unusual tells us something deeply broken about their normal experience. It tells us that the medical system usually treats them very differently. And the text reveals exactly why that is.
It's all about presentation.
It has everything to do with how the author presents themselves emotionally to the world.
The text pivots here into a profound critique of medical gatekeeping. It exposes how medical validation is frequently and unjustly tied to emotional performance.
Right.
The author notes a critical detail about their demeanor during the phone call. They say, even though we were still our normal, giddy, hyper-happy self, they didn't not believe us.
The giddy patient. This is such a striking, almost contradictory image to picture.
It really is.
You have someone meticulously cataloging joint pain, rib pain, relying on a wheelchair and recovering from recent falls, but they are delivering this grim data while being giddy, hyper, and happy.
We have to analyze the utility of that presentation. Like, why would a patient present that way in the face of immense suffering?
That's the real question.
Chronic pain patients frequently develop these cheerful coping mechanisms out of sheer necessity. When you live in a constant, unyielding state of discomfort, you simply cannot be weeping, wincing, or visibly agonizing 24 hours a day.
You literally collapse.
It is biologically exhausting for the patient, and from a sociological standpoint, it is incredibly alienating to the people around them. Friends, family, and colleagues experience compassion fatigue.
Right. People get tired of seeing you sad.
Exactly. So Individuals with chronic illness develop a mask, a cheerful, upbeat, hyper-capable demeanor that smooths over social interactions. It allows them to navigate society, hold down jobs, and maintain relationships without constantly being defined by their suffering.
I mean, I hear that, but I have to push back hard on this idea that the medical system is actively failing them here. Or at least, I want to look at it from the other side of the triage desk.
Okay, let's look at it.
You're calling this a systemic failure. But put yourself in the shoes of an ER triage nurse or a general practitioner who sees 40 patients a day. If a patient comes into a clinic or calls on the phone and they are smiling, articulate, cracking jokes, and acting giddy, how can we realistically expect a medical professional to log that as a severe active medical crisis?
That's a fair question.
Aren't the doctors and nurses just doing their jobs based on the visual and behavioral data the patient is actively choosing to present? We use visual heuristics because they usually work. If someone is bleeding and screaming, it's an emergency. If someone is laughing, they are stable. Is it fair to blame the workers for a patient's mask?
Your pushback highlights the exact tension at the center of modern medical diagnostics. You are entirely correct that medical professionals rely on heuristics, cognitive shortcuts, because they are operating in high-pressure, time-constrained environments.
Right. They don't have an hour to psychoanalyze everyone.
Exactly. The entire history of medical triage is designed around acute trauma. The protocols were built on battlefields and in early emergency rooms. They were designed to assess sudden, catastrophic changes to a healthy baseline, like a broken bone, a laceration, a heart attack.
Obvious, visible emergencies.
In acute trauma, visual and emotional heuristics are incredibly reliable. The pain scale from 1 to 10, often accompanied by those little cartoon faces going from a smile to a crying grimace, is deeply ingrained in medical training.
Oh, right, the Wong-Baker faces scale. We've all seen it in a doctor's office.
Exactly. But the catastrophic failure occurs when that acute trauma framework is applied to chronic systemic illness. The heuristics completely break down.
Because the patient doesn't fit the mold.
The medical system demands a performance of suffering that aligns with acute trauma. They expect groaning, a somber tone, a defeated posture, perhaps tears. When a chronic patient walks in someone who has spent 5 years adapting to the tilted floor, who uses a giddy mask just to survive the grocery store, the practitioner's brain receives conflicting data.
The words say one thing, the face says another.
Yes. The patient's words say, "My ribs are slipping out of place," but the patient's optics say, "I am comfortable." In a hurried clinical setting, the visual optics almost always override the verbal data. The practitioner subconsciously assumes the patient is exaggerating.
They'll just write it off.
Right. This isn't necessarily a malicious act by the individual doctor, but it is an objective failure of the diagnostic system to accommodate chronic realities.
That double bind is just infuriating. The author explicitly calls out this systemic bias. They write, so much of the system that we interact with just disregards all of that. And even the way we speak normally, it's just not considered to be accurate or serious.
It's a total trap.
It is a trap. If you cry and wince all the time, you might be labeled as hysterical or anxious. If you adapt, put on a brave face and act happy so you can function in society, the medical system says, well, you don't look sick, so your pain can't be real.
You can't win.
You literally have to constantly calibrate your emotional performance just to get basic health care.
It forces the patient to take on this immense, uncompensated labor of performing their illness correctly for whichever specific gatekeeper they are facing that day. It leads to profound medical gaslighting, where the patient's lived reality is constantly questioned.
Are you sure it hurts that bad?
Exactly. The patient is essentially told, your emotional presentation does not match our textbook definition of pain, therefore your words are invalid. The author has been deeply conditioned by years of these dismissive interactions.
So they just expect to be ignored.
They fully expect that their normal, giddy, hyper-happy self will automatically disqualify them from receiving proper care or even basic belief.
Which explains exactly why the moment on the phone was so revolutionary for them. The health workers at Ontario Health at Home did something seemingly basic but practically miraculous in the context of chronic care.
They just listened.
They did. The crux of the validation they experienced is summed up in this one brilliant, devastating line from the text. The response was to what we said, not to how we said it.
The response was to what we said, not to how we said it. That single sentence articulates the primary goal of almost all chronic illness advocacy.
It's so powerful.
The administrative workers bypassed the emotional optics entirely. They did not listen to the giddy, upbeat tone and use it to dismiss the severity of the content. Instead, they listened to the objective: clinical facts being reported, the reliance on a wheelchair, the recent falls, the widespread joint and rib pain, and they reacted appropriately to those facts.
They took them literally.
Yes. For a patient who has spent years being assessed for the authenticity of their suffering based on their facial expressions, being taken literally is a profoundly moving form of respect.
It's the purest distillation of being heard. Not being interpreted, not being psychologically evaluated, just having the data you provide accepted as truth.
Exactly.
But this brings up a fascinating secondary layer to the author's internal world. We've established that the giddy mask is a social shield. But what happens when that cheerful demeanor isn't just a fake performance for the doctors?
Oh, this is where it gets really deep.
What if it's actually rooted in a radical internal psychological shift regarding how the author processes physical sensation itself? Because the text reveals that the author has managed to fundamentally, mentally recategorize their own suffering.
The narrative takes us deep into the cognitive strategies required to survive a failing body. The text details how the author manages their daily existence, specifically focusing on how they decouple the raw physical sensation of pain from the emotional, evolutionary experience of panic.
And this shift starts with their discussion of the wheelchair. The author writes, which is something we're getting better at now. We use the wheelchair to stop ourselves from breaking down, but it doesn't mean we're not in pain.
That's a crucial distinction.
If you think about how society at large views a wheelchair, it is almost always framed in very absolute binary terms. The cultural assumption is that you only use a wheelchair if your legs literally, physically cannot move.
Right.
Or, even worse, it's viewed as a symbol of giving up a tragic, final loss of independence. But the author is reframing the mobility aid entirely. They're using it strategically.
It's a tool.
Exactly. They aren't using it because they are paralyzed. They're using it proactively to stop ourselves from breaking down. It is a tool for energy management.
It is a prophylactic measure, and adopting this mindset requires a massive paradigm shift for the patient. Society heavily stigmatizes ambulatory wheelchair users, people who can walk short distances but use a chair for longer ones.
Hey, I saw them stand up. They're faking it.
Exactly. The stigma demands that a patient must push their body to the absolute point of total failure and collapse before they are allowed to use an aid without judgment.
Which is just so backward.
It's completely toxic. The author is rejecting that toxic premise. They are deploying the aid proactively to preserve their baseline function, to conserve energy, and to prevent severe structural damage to their joints. But the crucial detail they add is that using the wheelchair does not eliminate the pain. The pain is still present. And this leads to the most important cognitive reframing in the entire reflection.
The author writes, it just means now the pain is just noise. It's not injury. I had to read that sentence 5 times. The pain is just noise. It's not injury.
It's mind-bending.
It is mind-bending to think about living that way. I tried to map this onto a concept we can all understand, and I came up with the check engine light analogy. Let's walk through it.
I'm very interested to hear how the check engine light illuminates this decoupling of pain and injury.
Okay, so for a healthy person, someone without a systemic chronic condition, pain acts exactly like a flashing red check engine light on a car's dashboard.
Okay.
When you are driving down the highway and that light suddenly flashes red, it means one specific thing. Pull the car over immediately. Something is actively breaking down. There is a catastrophic failure happening under the hood.
You need a mechanic right now.
Yes. The pain is a direct one-to-one signal of acute injury. You stop what you're doing, you go to the mechanic, you fix the broken part, and the light turns off.
From a biological standpoint, you are describing nociception.
Nociception.
Yes. For our listeners who might not be familiar with the term, nociception is the sensory nervous system's process of encoding noxious stimuli. It is the body's alarm system.
The check engine light.
Precisely. Heat, pressure, or chemical damage triggers nerve endings, sending a signal up the spinal cord to the brain, which translates it as pain, stop. It is a highly functional, absolutely necessary evolutionary warning system designed entirely for self-preservation. You touch a hot stove, nociception fires, you pull your hand back before the tissue burns.
Exactly. The alarm works. But for the author, because of their underlying condition, that check engine light is permanently wired in the on position.
The alarm is always blaring.
Always. They cannot pull the car over and fix it because there is no mechanic who can fix their fundamental structure.
Yeah.
They still have to drive the car, they still have to live their life, go to the store, and make phone calls.
They have to keep moving.
So what do they have to do? They have to learn, through sheer, exhausting mental force, to differentiate between the glowing red light on the dashboard, which represents the constant structural reality of their faulty body, and actual smoke pouring out from under the hood.
They are forced to consciously override the most primal, deeply ingrained alarm system in the human body.
Yes. When they use the wheelchair, their joints and ribs still hurt. The dashboard light is still glaring red, but because they know the wheelchair is structurally supporting them, because they know they are not currently bearing weight in a way that will cause a joint dislocation, they can look at that glaring red light and rationally say, okay, that is just the bulb burning, that is just noise. The engine isn't actively blowing up right now.
Whoa.
They decouple the raw sensation of pain from the emotional panic of an acute injury.
It is a masterclass in cognitive behavioral adaptation. Think about the immense neurological fortitude required to execute this override every single minute of the day.
It sounds impossible.
The lower brain, the amygdala, is constantly screaming, damage, danger, we are hurting. And the conscious mind, the prefrontal cortex, has to calmly step in, assess the data, and say, no, I have evaluated the situation, I am seated securely in my mobility aid, I am physically supported, I am safe. This severe sensation you are sending me is a false alarm. It is merely background static.
Background static, that's wild.
It is a profound triumph of human will over biology. But we must also recognize the catastrophic toll this takes.
Oh, the cognitive load must be staggering. If you're listening to this right now, maybe you're driving, maybe you're at work, imagine if the fire alarm in your building suddenly went off.
Blaring right in your ear.
Right, it's blaring, the strobe lights are flashing, your heart rate spikes. Imagine someone tells you the building isn't on fire. The alarm is just broken, but they can't turn it off. You have to sit at your desk and write emails, or you have to navigate traffic while a fire alarm blares in your ears, and you just have to continually convince yourself not to panic.
The sheer metabolic energy required to maintain that level of constant filtering is exhausting.
It explains so much.
It really helps explain why the author might present as giddy or hyper on the phone. When you are exerting that much intense mental control just to reclassify physical agony as noise, your outward emotional presentation might become heightened, tightly wound, or slightly detached from the grim reality of the physical data.
It's all connected.
You are performing a high-wire act in your own mind just to exist in the present moment. The giddiness is the byproduct of immense mental exertion.
This brings up a vital question regarding the physical reality that necessitates this mental high-wire act. If the body's alarm system is constantly sounding, and the physical structure is so prone to breaking down that a wheelchair must be used just to maintain a baseline of existence, what exactly is the nature of this physical fragility?
What's actually causing this?
Right, what kind of condition demands this level of intense strategic bodily management?
Well, the text explicitly names the condition, and in doing so, introduces a fascinating, seemingly contradictory nickname it has earned within both the medical and patient communities. The author is fighting Ehlers-Danlos syndrome,
Okay.
and the text reveals that Ehlers-Danlos is sometimes colloquially referred to as the princess disease.
The princess disease.
Okay.
It is a highly evocative term and one that is deeply loaded with historical, social, and gendered connotations.
Very much so.
The text explains exactly why this moniker exists. The author writes that Ehlers-Danlos makes everything about you so delicate that it has to be cared for perfectly.
And to understand why it requires perfect care, we have to understand what Ehlers-Danlos syndrome actually is. It is a genetic disorder that affects the body's connective tissue.
Connective tissue.
Connective tissue is primarily made of collagen. You can think of collagen as the biological glue, or the mortar between the bricks, that holds the entire human body together. It provides tensile strength to your skin, your blood vessels, your organs, and crucially, your joints, ligaments, and tendons.
So it's basically the scaffolding.
Exactly. In Ehlers-Danlos, the genetic instructions for building that collagen are faulty. The glue is defective. Therefore, the physical margin for error in daily existence is practically zero.
The author lists exactly what that perfect care looks like. It is not about being pampered, eating bonbons, or demanding luxury.
Not at all.
It's a rigorous, punishing list of physical requirements. They write, your posture has to be just right. You have to be fit. Your body's always working on your muscles and reducing your body fat and making your skin pale and delicate. You can't sleep unless everything is absolutely perfect.
The author themselves connects this desperate need for perfect environmental conditions to a specific historical and literary trope.
Which one?
They write, "It makes me feel so much like the person sent to live by the sea who was kind of frail and sick and delicate looking. This perfectly evokes the Victorian concept of the invalid."
Oh, like in the old novels.
Exactly. The fragile aristocrat, usually a woman, whose constitution is deemed so sensitive that she must be removed from the harshness of normal life and placed in an environment of total calm, sea air, and absolute environmental control just to survive.
I have to point out a major point of friction here regarding the phrase princess disease. When we hear that term in modern society, it usually sounds incredibly dismissive.
It sounds derogatory.
Yeah, it implies someone who's just being overly demanding, high maintenance, complaining about a pee under 20 mattresses. It implies a moral failing, a lack of grit, or a narcissistic need for attention. But the author is doing something powerful here. They're reclaiming the term.
They're owning it.
They're using it not to describe a personality flaw, but as an objective, punishing physiological reality.
It raises a vital question about how we judge physical needs. Like, how do we decouple the social judgment of being high maintenance from the strict medical necessity of precision care?
We need a better analogy than just a demanding royal. If the connective tissue is faulty, I picture building a suspension bridge. Let's say you're building the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah, okay, I'm with you.
You have the road, which represents your bones, and you have the massive steel cables holding the road up, which represent your ligaments and tendons. In a healthy person, those steel cables are incredibly strong. You can drive heavy trucks over the bridge, the wind can blow, and the cables hold the structure firmly in place.
They don't budge.
Right. But in a person with Ehlers-Danlos, the builders ran out of steel cables and decided to use cheap, stretchy bungee cords instead.
That is an excellent visualization of connective tissue laxity.
So you have a bridge held up by bungee cords. If a truck drives over it, which is just the equivalent of gravity acting on the body when walking or standing, the whole bridge bounces, sags, and twists out of alignment.
The structural integrity is inherently compromised.
Exactly. The only way to keep that bridge from collapsing into the water is if you have a massive team of workers standing on the bridge, grabbing the bungee cords, and constantly pulling them tight by hand.
And those workers represent the muscular system. For a healthy person, their body is like that sturdy steel cable suspension bridge. They can sleep awkwardly slumped over on a cheap couch, wake up, feel a bit stiff for 5 minutes, and then go run a mile.
Because their bridge is stable.
Yes. Their healthy connective tissue acts like heavy-duty shock absorbers, forgiving their postural sins and automatically snapping the joints back into place. But for the author, Ehlers-Danlos turns basic existence into a full-time job of bodily management.
Because they just have bungee cords.
Because their connective tissue lacks that tensile strength, an imperfect sleep position isn't just a minor stiffness. The gravity of lying down on an uneven mattress literally pulls their fragile skeleton out of alignment because the bungee cords stretch too far.
Oh, man.
They could wake up with a dislocated shoulder, a subluxated rib, or a shifted pelvis.
Every single physical variable has to be controlled. The text says your posture has to be just right. Why? Because if you slouch, your spine isn't supported by the ligaments. The joints just slip. It says you can't sleep unless everything is absolutely perfect.
The hypervigilance required to orchestrate this perfection every single hour of the day, including while you are trying to rest, is staggering.
It's a full-time job.
It is the exhaustion of micromanagement on a cellular level. You are the sole engineer responsible for manually operating a machine that is constantly, passively trying to dismantle itself.
That's a terrifying thought.
The princess moniker, when viewed through this biological lens, perfectly encapsulates the sheer delicacy of the situation. It highlights a biological system that demands royal levels of accommodation and perfect environmental control just to achieve a baseline of non-injury.
But this brings us to the ultimate pivot of the narrative. We arrive at the massive paradox that flips the entire princess trope on its head.
This is my favorite part.
If a body is this inherently delicate, if it requires this level of perfect care, perfect sleep, and environmental control just to exist without dislocating a joint, the natural, logical assumption is that the person inside that body must be incredibly fundamentally weak.
Right.
But the author reveals a reality that completely shatters that assumption.
The text counters the image of the frail person by the sea with a startling truth about survival. The author writes, but at the same time, we recognize the counter to it is becoming basically just more athletic.
Basically just more athletic. The delicate princess, the person whose joints hurt just from getting out of their carefully constructed nest, the person who relies on a wheelchair to prevent their body from breaking down, is forced to become an athlete.
It's wild to think about.
The author explicitly states, even though we need a wheelchair and all these braces, at the same time we're working on strengths that a lot of people just don't do. They don't need to, and it's also sometimes a pain in the ass to do.
This is the cruel, demanding irony of the condition. If we go back to your suspension bridge analogy, because the passive stabilizing structures of the body, the bungee cords, are fundamentally flawed, the body must rely entirely on active stabilization.
The workers on the bridge.
The muscles have to completely take over the job of the connective tissue. They have to clench, grip, and brace constantly just to hold the skeleton together against the force of gravity.
Sounds so tiring.
To achieve this, to have muscles capable of doing a job they weren't designed to do 24/7, the person must engage in rigorous, highly specialized physical conditioning.
It's the secret training. I was reading this and I immediately thought of a superhero origin story, but with a massive, exhausting twist. Usually the hero trains in secret to go out and fight villains or save the world. But here, we have the princess with secret training. They aren't training to fight external monsters. They're doing elite-level physical conditioning, micromuscle stabilization, intense proprioceptive work, just to hold their own joints together so they can sit upright in a chair without their ribs sliding out of place and causing blinding pain.
The motivation behind this athleticism is what sets it entirely apart from typical modern fitness culture. The author makes a vital, definitive distinction here.
What's that?
They write, but for us, it isn't just an idea that might help us have a better quality of life. It is a necessity of life.
That distinction is incredibly heavy, a necessity of life. For most people, going to the gym, doing Pilates, working on core strength, that is an optimization strategy.
It's a hobby.
Yeah, it's a lifestyle choice to feel a bit better, look a bit better, maybe climb the stairs without getting winded, or live a bit longer. If a healthy person skips the gym for a month, they might feel a little sluggish or lose a little muscle tone.
Nothing major happens.
Right. If the author skips their specialized conditioning, their skeletal structure literally begins to collapse under the weight of gravity. The joints fail. The pain, which they've worked so hard mentally to downgrade to noise, violently upgrades back to catastrophic injury.
It shifts athleticism from a pursuit of physical excellence to an act of desperate, relentless survival. When we synthesize these two seemingly opposed realities, the absolute physiological delicacy of the princess and the brutal, necessary daily discipline of the athlete, we arrive at the final synthesizing thought of the text.
How's the author put it?
The author reflects on the two ultimate outcomes of living with Ehlers-Danlos, and so it makes sense that either you end up frail by the sea or you end up strong beyond your stature.
Strong beyond your stature. That phrase gives me chills.
It forces a complete reevaluation of how we assess human strength. The text marvels at this duality. The author concludes, and either one of those feel like they fall into a type of princess category. The delicate one that is pale and frail, or the delicate one that is incredibly strong. Where did that come from? Like the princess with secret training?
The princess with secret training.
This is the core thesis of their reflection. The delicate one who is incredibly strong. We are socially conditioned to look at a person using a wheelchair, wearing joint braces, moving carefully, and see only fragility. We see the pale skin, the delicate presentation, the mobility aids, and our brains immediately pattern match that to weakness.
Because we're only looking at the outside. We're judging by the surface optics, just like the medical triage system we talked about earlier.
Sure.
We see the wheelchair and think frail. We don't see the secret training. We don't see the heroic, invisible, daily effort required to maintain the muscle mass needed to keep a spine aligned when the ligaments have given up. We don't see the immense cognitive discipline required to look at a glaring red dashboard of pain, silence the fire alarm in your head, and calmly categorize it as just noise.
The text demands that we fundamentally redefine strength. Strength is not always the towering figure lifting heavy weights in a gym. It might look exactly like a person seated in a wheelchair, meticulously holding their fragile form together through sheer will, hypervigilance, and invisible athletic discipline.
That's beautifully said.
It is a quiet, sustained, desperate kind of power that the healthy world rarely has to cultivate, and even more rarely recognizes when it is right in front of them.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We have gone on quite an intense journey today.
We really have covered a lot of ground.
We started with a mundane customer service phone call to Ontario Health at Home. We watched as a simple administrative checklist peeled back the layers of shifting baselines, revealing a reality where a life without pain is no longer even a concept that can be imagined.
Right.
We explored the systemic failures of medical optics, where putting on a giddy, happy mask just to survive society can actively disqualify you from receiving medical care. We saw that true validation only comes when someone finally bypasses the performance and listens to your words instead of judging your tone.
A rare moment of being truly heard.
We dove deep into the immense cognitive triumph of using a wheelchair to turn the primal panic of pain into manageable background noise. And finally, we arrived at the hidden, exhausting athleticism required to survive extreme physical delicacy, the princess with secret training.
It is a remarkable synthesis of extreme vulnerability and immense hidden power.
It really is. And I want to leave you with this application to carry into your own life. How often do we judge someone's internal struggles by how they appear on the outside?
Probably more often than we'd like to admit.
How often do we assume that because a colleague, a friend, or a stranger is giddy or smiling or highly functional, that they aren't carrying an immense invisible burden? Or conversely, how often do we mistake a necessary coping mechanism like a wheelchair or a carefully curated nest or a cheerful mask for the full story of a person's capability?
We just assume we know based on a glance.
We look at the surface, we see the 15-degree slant of the floor, and we naively assume we understand the reality of the person walking on it. But we so rarely see the secret training it takes just to stay standing.
To build on that, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over long after this deep dive ends. We live in a society that insists on viewing strength and fragility as complete opposites.
Yeah, totally separate ends of the spectrum.
They are positioned at opposite ends of the human spectrum. But if we truly internalize the reality of the delicate athlete, we must ask ourselves a harder question. What if true strength isn't the absence of fragility? We celebrate the unbreakable, the rugged, the things that naturally resist damage. But what if the absolute highest form of human strength is the invisible, relentless, daily discipline required to keep a fragile existence from shattering? Think about that the next time you encounter someone navigating a tilted floor you cannot see.